We had one before that we denied.
Good afternoon. I'm going to call this February 15th, 2024 meeting of the Board of Zoning Appeals to order. I would request from the staff confirmation that the Kansas Open Meeting Act required notice has been properly provided.
I can confirm that the packet was posted and the required notice of the meeting was provided.
Thank you. And now we'll have roll call.
Board Member Creer.
Here.
Board Member May.
Here.
Board Member Dorsweiler.
Present.
Board Member Waters.
Here.
Board Member Owens. Board Member Troe.
Here.
Board Member and Chair Hardy.
Here.
Oh. Board Member and Chair Hardy.
Here.
We have 6 of our 7 members present, and that gives us a quorum to proceed with today's business.
Thank you. Our first item of business is approval of the minutes of the January 18, 2024 regular meeting. Are there any corrections or comments?
I move we approve the January 18th minutes.
I second.
We have a second, a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. New business, item 3.1, application number V24-1. At this time, we'll have a summary presentation by the staff.
We'll have Mr. Aiken will be presenting the report on application V24-1, which was filed by Scott Smith, contractor, on behalf of Mr. Scott Kraus.
Thanks, Dean. As Dean said, this application was filed by Scott Smith on behalf of Scott Kraus, and it's a request for approval of a rear yard setback variance of 7 feet from 25 feet, which is the minimum rear yard setback required in the R1 zoning district, to 18 feet to allow the construction of a 20 by 20, 400 square foot covered porch addition on the rear of a dwelling at 2928 Tasker Lane. The property owner's lot is irregularly shaped and it contains approximately 9,131 square feet. With the addition of this proposed 400 square foot porch, approximately 26.8% of the lot would be covered with structures, which is under the 35% maximum lot coverage in the R1 district. City building permit records show that this 2,048 square foot dwelling was constructed in 1998, and it was built with a 32.66 foot rear yard setback. So on November 17th of last year, Scott Smith, the applicant in this case, submitted a building permit application and plans for the construction of a 400 square foot porch addition on the rear side of the dwelling at 2928 Tasker Lane. Because the construction of covered porches are treated like dwelling additions, they must conform with the setback requirements applicable to dwellings, which is a 25-foot rear yard setback in the R1 district. The zoning administrator determined that the subject property has a rear yard building setback of 32.66 feet, and this porch would encroach into that area, resulting in a setback of only 18 feet. So Mr. Smith filed this variance request, and as justification, the applicant states there's a commercial property directly to the west of the property owner's backyard area where this porch is being proposed, and no residential dwellings abut the property to the west. And so the applicant believes that the impacts associated with this would be minimal because it's abutting a commercial property. So the surrounding land uses are single-family dwellings in all directions, zoned R1, except for to the west, where it's a PC3 Salina Sam's Club. In terms of the staff analysis, starting with uniqueness, the need for a variance must be caused by a condition that's unique to the property and not shared by other properties in the area. The applicant states that the subject property is unique because it's irregularly shaped, and the dwelling is oriented in a curved direction, and the rear of the dwelling does not run parallel to the rear property line like a majority of homes in the subdivision. And because of that, he asserts that only a small portion of the proposed porch area would encroach into the required rear yard setback. And lastly, the applicant states there's a large drainage ditch to the west, and there's no residential dwellings that abut the property to the west, so they believe that the impacts with this porch would be minimal because it would only be noticeable from the property owners to the north, to the south, and the Sam's Club loading bay area to the west. So although staff would agree that the majority of dwellings in the Tasker Addition, and more specifically Block 1 of the Tasker Addition, are oriented so that the rear of the dwellings run parallel to the rear yard property line, it's far from a unique circumstance as there are dwellings in Block 1 of the Tasker Addition more generally, and throughout the city of Salina that are oriented at an angle. Also, irregularly shaped residential lots are not particularly unique. Staff also agrees with the applicant that abutting a large commercial development is a unique condition to this property, and typically the impacts of a rear yard addition, like the one being proposed here, are reduced when abutting a commercial property with a high intensity use in comparison to, say, other residential dwellings. And then, as stated earlier, this property abuts the loading bays of the Sam's Club, so that would be classified as a high intensity commercial use. Staff would also note that the property owner's lot is unique compared to many subdivisions in the city due to its shallow depth of an average at 113.7 feet. Since the 70s, the typical platted lot in new residential subdivisions is about 120 to 130 feet, and this results in homes having 60 to 70 foot deep backyards typically, so constructing a 20-foot deep covered porch outside the rear yard setback area wouldn't typically be a problem or a challenge. So while the property owner's lot, it meets code as to minimum depth requirements, it's substandard compared to many other R1 residential lots in the city. And then that coupled with the 38-foot depth of the house creates the need for the setback variance. In terms of no adverse effects on neighbors, the variance cannot cause any adverse effects on neighboring properties. The applicant states that because this covered porch addition wouldn't create any adverse effects on neighboring properties because it would be entirely contained on the subject lot. Staff agrees with the applicant that this proposed variance wouldn't create many adverse effects on neighboring properties because it would all be contained on the owner's lot, and it wouldn't be visible from Tasker Lane. And also with the submitted materials shown up there, it would be visually compatible with the existing dwelling. However, because this proposed porch would take up space in the rear yard setback area, which is intended to remain open for both current and future residents, as well as provide space to access utilities, it could potentially restrict the flow of air and sunlight in the rear yard. In terms of unnecessary hardship, the applicant must show that not granting the variance will cause an unnecessary hardship by denying reasonable use of the property. And the applicant states that strict application of the rear yard setback requirement would be an unnecessary hardship because the addition is not being proposed atop any fences, structures, easements, or any other objects like that. Staff would agree with the applicant there that with the provided site plan, it's clear that this covered porch addition wouldn't be constructed atop any fences, structures, or easements in the rear yard. However, staff would request that the applicant provide additional explanation as to why not being able to construct a covered rear yard porch that's 20 feet by 20 feet that would encroach into a required setback would constitute an unnecessary hardship on the property owner. The requested variance must not adversely affect the health, safety, and welfare of the public. And the applicant here states that the porch would not create any adverse effects on the health, safety, and welfare of the public because it wouldn't create unsafe traffic conditions, it wouldn't encroach into future right-of-way, and it wouldn't increase the risk of fire spread or flooding. So staff would agree that as proposed, this porch addition wouldn't obstruct visibility or create unsafe traffic conditions. It wouldn't encroach into future right-of-way, significantly increase the risk of fire spread or flooding, or cause an aesthetic eyesore from Tasker Lane. Although the applicant is correct that a covered rear yard porch would not have many adverse effects on public health, safety, and welfare. Approving a variance in this case could potentially set a precedent for the construction of other covered porches and other structures and required rear yard setback areas in other properties around the city. And then lastly, with conformity with general spirit and intent of the zoning ordinance, the variance must conform to the general spirit and intent of the zoning ordinance, and it shouldn't be granted if it would, in fact, undermine or defeat the purpose for which a regulation was adopted. So the applicant states that the proposed covered porch would aesthetically match and complement the features of the existing dwelling, and therefore wouldn't undermine the spirit and intent of the zoning ordinance. So without any physical constraints that make compliance with the setback requirement impossible, the board must consider that granting a variance in this case could potentially undermine the spirit and intent of the rear yard building restriction. Although staff agrees with the applicant that constructing a rear yard porch that stays out of the required 25-foot rear yard setback would result in a porch that is short in depth, it's incumbent on the applicant to demonstrate to the board that there are no other rear yard locations where this covered porch could be built, and that constructing a shorter porch that stays out of the setback would result in a structure that is unusable. So with that, staff has identified the following alternatives for the board's consideration. Number one, the board could approve this setback variance as requested with or without conditions if the required findings of fact can be made. The board could approve a lesser setback variance than requested with or without conditions if the findings can be made. The board could postpone consideration of this request and direct the applicant to provide additional information at a future meeting. Or the board could deny the applicant's request if the required findings of fact cannot be made. So staff agrees with the applicant that this proposed covered porch addition would not create many adverse effects on neighboring properties because it's being proposed at the rear of a dwelling, and it would only be visible from residential properties to the south, to the north, and the Sam's Club loading bays to the west. Most impacts from this would be contained on the property owner's lot, and it would be aesthetically and architecturally compatible with the existing dwelling. Also, this property is unique because it's only 113 feet deep, and it abuts a high-intensity commercial use directly to the west. However, staff is of the opinion that the applicant needs to provide additional information as to how this property is so unique that approval of a variance to the standard rear yard setback requirement can be justified in this case, and how having to construct a smaller porch in lieu of what's being proposed would create an unnecessary hardship on the property the property owner. So that concludes staff's presentation. We also provided some possible findings in support of approval and denial attached to the packet, but staff and the property owner are around for any questions if you have any.
Thank you. Are any questions for staff at this time?
Yeah, I got a couple. How does this lot compare to lots around it? Is that the same size?
Many are the same size, like on that block.
Okay.
So it's pretty average
Okay.
in terms of depth for this subdivision and this block more specifically. But like stated earlier, it's a bit smaller in terms of depth than many other R1 zoned subdivisions throughout the city.
Alrighty. How's I noticed like the house just south of there.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like they reach back in the backyard a little bit. What's their setback there as compared to this?
Zoom in. That might be a. Oh, what is that?
That looks like a storage shed or perhaps a detached garage. If it looks like looks like a driveway might wrap around the house.
Yeah.
So the
detached,
difference
though.
is if it's a detached structure, then it can be located as close as 3 feet to a side yard and 5 feet to a rear yard unless there's an easement back there, in which case it has to stay out of the easement. So there are different setbacks for detached sheds and garages as opposed to something that's attached to and part of the house.
Okay, thank you.
All right, any other questions? I would also, before we get to the applicant, to possibly lean on one of the possible findings, either in support of approval or denial when making our determination. That would be helpful to staff. All right, the applicant present. Would you please state your name and address for the record, please?
Okay, Scott Kraus, 2928 Tasker Lane. So to give you a little bit more information, so I hired a builder to build this deck, and as you kind of pointed out, neighbors around and other houses in the neighborhood have their decks and stuff go a lot further back to the property line. So we had no indication that this would be a problem when we came to file for the building permit. So we adjusted a little bit on the plans. So my house, where the patio door is on the back side, it goes out 2 foot. So it's actually only 18 feet on the south side that about 20 by 20 would be. Do you have the site plan showing the addition? There we go. So on the south side, you can see how the house jogs out. So if we're down to 18 feet, not the actual 20, the 20 goes back all the way to the house. So if we actually had to make that the hardship of 7 feet less off of that, that only leaves 11 feet and in front of the door. And I cannot take the deck any further to the north also to gain more space due to a water well in there. And then also it would be a hardship of tying the roof in, the builder, into the peak of the addition back into the original roof line on it and stuff. If we moved it further west, which would require moving a water well that's drilled right there too. So another thing is, so the house right to the south, Dean talked about the detached shed being there. Also, if you go to Google Maps, that patio is attached to the house. That has an 18-foot from the property line. And also, there is other houses in the neighborhood that have attached roofs for their patio. One's 2948, another across the street, which butts up to another residential area, which is 2953. Its attached patio roof is 18 feet 6 inches off the back too. So there's other houses in the neighborhood with attached roofs that are within that 18 feet or less.
One question, it's the structure is the distance, not the roof overhang, is that correct?
It's measured if the roof has, if it's like this is more of a closed-in porch, but if it was like a covered deck, you would measure to the supports, not to the overhang. Just like if we're measuring the setback, the side yard setback of a house, you measure from the foundation wall, you don't measure from the roof overhang. So a setback is measured from either the supports or the foundation wall to the property line.
So here you'd gain a foot. If you have about a foot overhang, this would actually be 19 feet.
So the 18 feet or the 20 feet would be to the edge of the structure, and then he's got an overhang of,
Okay.
I believe, 18 inches or something like that.
I just read it as a 20 foot by 20 foot roof structure, but that's actually the 20, so you have a 21 foot.
Yes.
Okay.
Fenced in patio.
I was just-
Or fenced, screened in.
That happened once before, and we were like, oh, you don't have a problem, you're good to go. It was
Okay.
off the overhang and not the structure, and
Gotcha.
so, once again, here you're 6 or 7 feet in, so.
And there would be no enclosures on the three sides then? Just the partial walls?
Yeah, it'll be a screened in. So
Screened
I don't
in.
know if you call that. So it'll be a partial we're looking at doing a partial wall, and I think it's not a thin stand wall, you'd have to screen it, so yeah. It's gonna be a short wall with a screen up above, so.
And then, so going down the steps, and that would be open, or would that be screened as well?
It will have a door in there is what we'll have, a screen door of some sort. And it is a poured foundation is what it will be, so there'll be concrete walls poured and stuff like that.
So you're proposing a 20-foot by 20-foot structure. Can you elaborate a little bit more on what the hardship would be if you built a 13 by 20-foot structure instead of a 20 by 20-foot structure?
So the big thing is this rendering shows my doors to the house being centered, which it's not. It's all the way to the right as you're looking at that picture. And that kind of goes back to the shot of the lot and stuff. The big thing is when you come out onto it, which we've been dealing with that since 1999 when I moved there, is when you walk out onto it, we want more space. So if we reduce it the 7 feet, it only allows 11 feet from my west wall to my patio door. And 11 feet is not a lot if you're trying to put table, chairs, stuff like that. And obviously I would like to keep the west side of this flush or straight, not a jog in it. So now we have a 20-foot by narrow, I guess is what it boils down to. And if you put a round table, 6 chairs, stuff like that, it's getting cramped, and I can't really go any further than 20 feet to the north without moving a water well. And then we run into some structural problems. Did I answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Dustin, I was wondering if you could put the site plan with the addition on it up for just a second. So one of the things that Mr. Aiken and I were discussing, and we probably didn't address it as much focus in our report as we could have, but this setback over here on this side probably is actually conforming, and it's just the point that was making is if to make this 25 feet parallel from the rear lot line, you could come in there and make a trapezoid covered porch to make it 25 feet all across the line, but then having a trapezoid shaped porch would be a real challenge from a construction and functionality standpoint. So we mentioned it kind of in passing, but I think one thing to focus on here is the fact that it isn't square and parallel is that there's really only a portion in the corner here that's into the setback, and that this portion over here is actually farther than 25 feet. And so there's only a triangular portion here that's extending into the setback instead of the full 20-foot width. There's only a portion of that, and it would seem awkward to impose on the contractor and the owner to try to build a trapezoid-shaped porch.
Very good. Other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Are there any comments by interested citizens?
We did send letters out to neighboring property owners, and we did not receive any comments written or by phone call back. So we don't know how the neighbors feel, but nobody contacted us to register any objections. So.
Very good. Is there anyone on Zoom?
Yeah, we have no one online from the public right now. So anyone interested in commenting would be in the room.
Very good. Thank you. All right. With that, I'll bring this application back to the board for discussion and possible action. And if you could refer to one of the findings to help add a little justification to our decision. Thoughts?
From what I've heard today with the presentation from staff and the applicant, I'm in support of this approval. That's my thoughts.
I'd like to make a motion.
Go ahead.
I move that the board approve the rear yard setback variance as requested, since I believe the findings of fact can be made.
Second.
Very good. We have a motion and a second. Would we want to attach any of the findings in support of approval to that motion?
I think, didn't the maker of the motion cite or make reference to the findings of fact that were attached to the report?
Okay.
I think the motion, as we recorded it, that to approve the variance as requested based on the findings of fact attached to the staff report.
Okay. Very good.
That would work for us.
Okay. Very good. All right. Any further discussion? All in favor of approval of application number V24-1, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
So for the benefit of Mr. Kraus, that will allow us to issue your building permit based on today's actions.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, item number 3.2, application number V24-2. We'll hear a presentation by staff at this time.
Mr. Hers, nursing a cold, will do his best to present this item. It's been filed by Mike McCall, an architect, on behalf of Selina Grace, and it also involves a rear yard setback variance for a covered patio structure. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Hers to present today's report.
Thank you, Dean and Board. So the subject property of today's item is the Ace Hardware store on South and Broadway, at the intersection of South and Broadway, which you see on the screen. And the history of this property is that it was originally platted in 1958, with the Gibson's discount store being constructed in 1966. In 2000, the owner of the property, which at the time was Salina Building Company, decided to divide the building up into three parts. One part, the south part, is where Ace is today, and then there's two tenant spaces that are a little over 15,000 square feet to the north of the Ace property, or tenant space. As part of that development, Chicago Street, which used to run through all the way from South up to Spruce, was vacated by the city commission, and the parking lot was reconfigured so that it is fully intact as a parking lot without the street running through it. So as part of that redevelopment, the Gibson store was divided into three tenant spaces, one of which was Ace, and that's the anchor unit, and Chicago Street was vacated and the parking lot was restructured. So the nature of today's request is Selina Grace is one of the tenants within those two tenant spaces to the north. So you have Ace at the south end, you have Selina Corrections at the north, and then in the middle you'll have Selina Grace. And what they're proposing to do is construct a covered patio at the west end of their property. And so it would come out 16 feet and be about 40 feet in length. And the purpose of the patio is many of their clients smoke and need a somewhat climate controlled area, not fully climate controlled because it's still open to the elements, but it would be covered so you'd be free from rain and snow, and they'd have fans and heating units for the seasons in which those are required. So that's what they're proposing, and they're proposing to do that again between the building and the alley. So there is a 16-foot alley to the east of the property. That alley is 20 feet from the building, and the proposed structure would come out 16 feet into that 20-foot setback, which would only leave a setback of 4 feet from the west or the east property line and the proposed structure. The required setback in the C3 district is 15 feet, or is 15 feet. So they're asking for a variance to allow the setback to be reduced from 15 down to 4. The applicant when they talk about the uniqueness of the property, they point out that they are adjacent to a 16-foot wide alley. And that 16-foot wide alley does make a big difference, because in that case, even with a 4-foot setback from the property line, the proposed structure would still be 20 feet from the adjacent residential lots, their west property lines. And so staff would agree that that is a unique circumstance that a lot of commercial properties don't have. In looking at the adverse effects on the neighbors, the proposed covered structure would be at the rear of the building, and so it would only be visible from the alley and the adjacent residential properties to the east. And so there was very few people that would potentially be impacted, and the impact should be minimized by the 20-foot distance from the proposed structure and the residential properties to the east. The applicant notes that there is an existing covered structure already on the community corrections facility or tenant space to the north, and it hasn't caused any problems. Staff doesn't have any record of this structure being permitted. When we did our research, we consulted our aerial photography, our historic aerial photography, and we discovered that it was installed sometime between 2001 and 2005, because it wasn't there in our 2001 aerial photography, but it was there in 2005 aerial photography. So it has been there since whenever it was constructed, and we were ignorant to its existence, at least. No one's brought it to our attention, but we do not have any permits for that structure. Looking at the unnecessary hardship, the applicant states that denying the requested side yard variance would cause an unnecessary hardship on Salina Grace. They have many clients that require an outside gathering space that's protected from weather due to their mental and health needs. Staff would agree that the outdoor space, having a covered outdoor space, would be primarily limited to the east side of the building. You have the Salina Corrections Facility, Saline County Corrections Facility to the north. You have the Ace Hardware space to the south. And on the west side, you have the existing sidewalk and parking lot for the multi-tenant development. And so there really aren't any opportunities to have a covered structure, with the exception of the open space behind the building to the east. And so constructing a covered patio on the west side of the building would require the removal and modification of the sidewalk and portions of the parking lot area in front of the tenant space, which could constitute an unnecessary hardship for Salina Grace. The effect on the public health, safety, and welfare, the applicant states that the variance desired will not adversely affect the public health, safety, morals, order, convenience, prosperity, or general welfare of the public, as the variance would only help all of the items of the proposed property. Staff would agree that the proposed covered patio addition would not obstruct visibility or create an unsafe traffic conditions. It would not encroach in any future right-of-way or significantly increase the risk of fire spread or flooding or cause aesthetic eyesores for the neighbors because it's behind the building. And it would also be only visible from the alley and the adjacent residential properties. Looking at the conformity and general spirit of the and intent of this ordinance, the reason we have side yard setback requirements is to make sure that we have preserved open space that reduces the risk of fire spread, allows water to move, and have proper drainage runoff and reduce flooding. And it also increases airflow and sunshine. And in this case, because there is a 16-foot alley, the proposed building would still be 20 feet from the adjacent residential properties, which primarily meets the intent of that ordinance of having a 16-foot setback. So although the building would only be 4 feet from the property line, from a functional standpoint, it would still exceed that 15-foot setback. So staff does have a number of alternatives. We also have some findings that are listed. The findings are on page 7. The alternatives are on page 8. Option 1, the board could approve the side yard setback variance as requested with or without any conditions that the required findings of fact can be made. The board could approve a lesser side yard variance, in other words, not allow the full variance to go all the way to within 4 feet of the property line, but maybe go within like 8 feet of the property line or something like that. Something that would still allow them to encroach into the side yard setback, but not the full amount they're requesting. So that's an option. Option 3, the board could postpone consideration if additional information is needed. And 4, the board could deny the applicant's request for the side yard setback if the findings of fact cannot be made. And so we do have a couple of conditions that we would recommend if the board feels the variance should be approved. And the first condition is that the covered porch must remain open on all 3 sides. It may not be enclosed with sidewalls. And then the second is that a fence permit must be applied for and approved for any fence that exceeds 6 feet in height. So the regulations that we have allow you to install a fence on your property line 6 feet or less. If you exceed 6 feet, it does require a permit to make sure that it's structurally sound and it has the proper footings and can bear the wind loads that it may be subject to. So with that, staff would answer any questions you might have. We will note that the owner of the property has submitted a letter in support of the proposed variance, and I believe everyone has a copy of that at their seat, and they are also in the audience here today. So any questions you might have, we would take those.
Thank you. Do we have questions for staff at this time?
The patio that's existing, that's non-code, how deep is it? Did you say that? I must have missed it.
I think it's roughly the same size. I went out and looked at it. I didn't photograph it, but it's roughly 4 to 5 feet off the edge of the alley. So it looks like it's roughly the same size as what's proposed here.
Oh, okay, thank you.
It appears to be coming out 16 feet, which is what the applicant is proposing. So it'd be very similar.
And this would be clear from any utility easement that's in the area.
Yeah,
Utilities would be inside the alleyway itself, and so this is not encroaching into that.
All right. Any other questions?
Still got one yet. With it being a smoking area and stuff like that, when I see most places, do you foresee, or will they be able to eventually close the sides in or stuff? Because that wind's going to be windy down through there, and I'm just curious what's going to happen in the future.
Yeah, so one of the motivations for having this covered space is because state regulations don't allow indoor smoking, and so this is the closest you can come to having a climate-controlled environment and still being open. And so what they can do for comfort is they'll have the covering, they'll have heaters for cold environments, and they'll have fans when it gets warm, and anything beyond that the applicant can maybe explain, but that's what was explained to us.
If it were enclosed by walls on all sides, then it would be essentially indoor smoking, and that is what's covered by the Salina's ordinance is indoor smoking, and this, as it's designed, would be considered outdoor smoking, and so there wouldn't be any restrictions on it.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Would the applicant like to make a presentation at this time? Might state your name and address for the record, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Mike McCaw with Imsgard Architects, 922 South Marymount, here in Salina. As far as the enclosing, no, we do not plan on enclosing. We have gone in for permits for the interior remodel and the patio fence and everything outside. That's already been through the city and approved. So we will have an 8-foot, the plan is to have an 8-foot wood fence or solid fence around the patio itself. So from the wind and that kind of stuff, you're going to get some protection for our clients from that. But we will leave the actual structure will be open on 3 sides. We do have also a emergency exit gate that'll be installed on that with a handicap ramp to get out of that space as part of the building package that we have currently in the city and working on right now. So as far as the, like we stated, with the 16-foot alley with the 4-foot setback off of that, matching the existing structure, that's kind of where we kind of came up with the 16-foot. We were just matching what was previously done. We had no clue if it was permitted or not until we got farther into this episode and found that it was not, according to the city, but it's not part of our deal. So, but that's where we kind of came up with that. With our clientele that comes to this building, it's very important to have some space like this. So that they need just to get outside, get some fresh air, because they could be kind of hanging in the space all day. They're usually open most days. They have lots of resources for different things in county or the city or in the county for kind of the homeless is kind of what Grace really detains to. So, so this is it. We're just trying to make a comfortable space outside the building so we don't have people out in the parking lot, out front, hanging out where we really don't want them. And, you know, we've got customers from the other businesses and stuff coming and going. So we'd like to, you know, have a space so they could hang out in the back. And with what we've tried to put together in the setbacks, I think should be really good space for them and not really encroach on anything building wise or zoning wise. So
Very good. Any questions for the applicant?
Well, I had a question, but I think you answered it just a little bit ago. But I'll go ahead and state my question anyway. Throughout the presentation, the one thing that I couldn't help but wonder is the variance, in essence, is we're asking for a variance to allow a population group to engage in unhealthy behavior, right? So to speak.
True.
And we're adding creature comforts to allow them to engage that unhealthy behavior comfortably. So my question was, if we don't have these creature comforts, if we don't have this area, where do these people go? Are they going to engage in this vice less? But that's where I was leading into. I think you answered that question by stating they won't be on the porch. They'll be out front. They'll be
Correct.
Potentially.
They'll be around down on the sidewalks around the neighborhood area. Yeah. So that's kind of we know they're going to do it. That's part of the program. We hope we can get some of them off of that with the programs they offer there, but we still know that that's going to happen, and sometimes it's just space just to get them outside to cool off or whatever, because there might be a mental, issue that's going on at the time, and they just need to go outside and get some sunshine and some air to cool down. So there's lots of different things that goes on, but it was just another area we'd like to focus on to help the clients that they serve. So
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you. Go ahead.
My only other question is, will this area be somewhat monitored to ensure that only legal vices are being used?
The only way into the space will be from the building. So when they come in, they get checked in at the front of the building. They check in, they have to check all the materials, anything they're carrying, bags, anything gets checked in. The whole property inside and that area will be monitored by cameras. There is a security detail that's there from the time it's open till they close. So it'll be monitored the whole time that we've got this. I know one thing that will be brought up later, but we will add some sprinkler heads. The building is sprinkled currently, so we know we'll have to drop a couple heads out there to cover that from a fire standpoint. So we've kind of looked at all those options, but so it's fully monitored, and we'll even have the gate that goes outside will be monitored with alarm, so we'll know if somebody goes out of the space into the alley, so we can stop that. So is the plan. It's really emergency exit only, but certainly know they'll still use it from time to time, so.
Thank you.
Yep.
So that was something that staff didn't really mention in its report under public health, safety, and welfare, but a point that Mr. McCall made that's important is that the rear door for the building would be considered an emergency fire exit. And so you don't want to construct a fenced-in or gated area behind a fire exit and then not have an exit from that area. So having an emergency gate in the fenced-in area allows that to be continue to be used as an emergency fire exit.
Very good. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any comments by interested citizens this time?
We do not have anyone online, so all the comments would be in the.
I did not, didn't come in a written form to hand out to you, but I did, and even though they're not directly adjacent, the owners, the Revolution Church, which is on the south side of South Street, did receive a letter on this, and they wanted to convey to me that they were supportive of the request.
Very good. All right, at this time then, we'll bring the item back to the board for discussion and possible action.
I'd like to make a motion.
All right.
I move that the board approve the side yard setback variance as requested with the following conditions. That the covered patio must remain open on all 3 sides and may not be enclosed by sidewalls, and a separate fence permit must be applied for and approved for any fence that exceeds 6 feet in height.
All right, is there a second?
I second.
All right, any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. Motion carries. All right. Are there any other items of business that we need to discuss today?
I do not think that we do. Your involvement is pretty rare, and the number of sign variance applications we receive is rare, but we've had some discussions within the community about painted wall signs and murals and size of those and how they relate to size limitations and all. And so the city has retained the services of a nationally recognized sign code consultant who is in Salina today and tomorrow. And tomorrow, you can tell me the exact time, Margie, for the boards. Okay, so in this room at 10:30, we specifically invited the Downtown Design Review Board and the Planning Commission. But as board members who occasionally look at signs, would just tell you that in this room at 10:30, there will be a presentation to city boards and commissions about signs and about those particular topics. The distinction, which is not easy to make, between what's a mural and what's a sign and those types of things. So if any of you, as I know Carla's been invited as a planning commission member, but if any of you as board members have a dying interest in learning about signs or sign codes, you are certainly welcome to attend in this room at 10:30 tomorrow.
All right, thank you.
Will it be on Zoom as well? Or is it?
No, it will not. It will mostly be focused on letting you or other board members provide their input on the adopted sign code. So there won't be much of a presentation. It'll be more of just a talking session to listen and hear your thoughts.
Okay.
Okay. Is there any use of a public forum today?
Anybody that
Okay.
wants to speak on a topic not on today's agenda. So.
All right, very good. Then hearing none, or you wanted to?
No, I was.
Okay. Then we can have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
And
I second.
Okay, we are adjourned.